Every day, excessive delays and denials from big insurers keep patients from accessing the care they need. And when care is urgent, these delays can be disastrous. These practices cost billions in wasteful spending, driving up costs for American families. But while big insurers put up barriers, America's hospitals and health systems are in your corner, navigating endless reviews and appeals to get you the care you need when you need it most. It's time to curb these harmful practices and put the focus back on patients. Brought to you by the Coalition to Strengthen America's Healthcare.
Good afternoon. Getting right down to business here. Thank you very much for that generous introduction. We are doing it live, doing more at 4 weekday afternoons. Mottek on Money, live on the air, 790 KBC, streaming live online worldwide at kbc.com. The on-demand Mottek on Money podcast, kbc.com, Apple iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, all your favorite podcast platforms. Stocks pulling back today. We have some breaking news here now. A New Mexico jury found that Facebook and Instagram's parent company Meta is liable for failing to protect young people from online dangers, including sexually explicit content, solicitation, and human trafficking. A jury just a little while ago found Meta liable for misleading consumers about the safety of its platforms and endangering children under the New Mexico state consumer protection laws. Now, this is a landmark verdict here, including $375 million in civil penalties. The case among the first to test questions about whether social media companies should be held responsible for the content posted on their platforms. Meta disagrees with the verdict and plans to appeal, according to a company spokesman. On Wall Street today, we saw a choppy trading session with the Dow coming in for a closing loss of 84 points. The S&P 500 down 25. The Nasdaq down 185. This after a strong start to the new week yesterday. Today's a choppy session marking the latest twist for the markets with Iran in focus and the price of oil in focus as well. We see Brent crude oil moving higher today to close to $105 a barrel, while in New York, West Texas Intermediate oil moved higher to $92.35 a barrel. We did see the Nasdaq lead the declines today. The tech names took a hit, with the Nasdaq down nearly 1%, down 185 points back to 21,762. Fearful that higher inflation will discourage the Fed from cutting rates, investors have sold off bonds. We've seen reactions in the bond market lately, with the yield on the 10-year note now at as high as 4.39% earlier. Right now it's at 4.36%. Gold and silver, meanwhile, continue to slide, impacting Wall Street as well as Main Street. We'll get an update on the real economy out there this afternoon with Elliot Salter, owner of Elliot Salter Pawn Shop and Loans in West Hollywood. He'll be joining us live later this hour. Turning now to the Middle East, we understand mediators from Turkey, Egypt, and Pakistan now pushing to have a meeting arranged between the U.S. and Iran in the next couple of days. Both sides remain far apart, according to the Wall Street Journal. Pakistan offered to mediate peace talks between the U.S. and Iran to end the war, an overture that was amplified by President Trump on social media. The U.S. now sending Iran a 15-point plan to end the war, which centers largely around previous Trump administration demands on Iran. Iran pressing its assault in the Middle East, meanwhile hitting Israel. Several cities in Israel hit, as well as Kuwait, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia with new attacks. The Pentagon, meanwhile, planning to deploy about 3,000 soldiers from the Army's elite 82nd Airborne Division to the Middle East to support operations against Iran, according to two U.S. officials talking to the Wall Street Journal. Israel's defense minister threatened military control of a large area of Lebanon, and oil company Shell's CEO warned that the Iran conflict could cripple fuel supplies, while ConocoPhillips has asked the Trump administration to protect Qatari oil and gas facilities. The International Atomic Energy Agency says Iran notified it that another projectile struck the premises of the country's Bushehr nuclear power plant. The agency said Iran reported no damage to the plant and no injuries. I'll discuss the latest news in the Middle East with retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Kempfer, retired Marine Corps intelligence officer, national security analyst, and host of the Strat podcast, which happens to be based right here in Southern California. But first, on your money, the markets, the economy, geopolitics, and the whole works now. Joining us live is Steve Forbes, the one and only Steve Forbes, chairman and editor-in-chief of Forbes Media, which includes Forbes magazine, former Republican presidential candidate, longtime tax reform advocate, author of numerous books, including his latest, Inflation, What It Is, Why It Is Bad, and How to Fix It. Steve Forbes, thank you very much for taking the call with us here this afternoon.
Good to be with you. A lively time, to say the least.
Certainly, certainly. Let's start with the Iran and the latest news here. According to the Wall Street Journal, this plan that's been proposed, Pakistan possibly mediating, and attacks on Israel continue. Give us your reaction to these latest headlines here.
Well, I think what the Iranian strategy is very clear, and that is use negotiations as a way to keep the regime surviving. If the regime survives, then it wins, even with the massive destruction. So they've played this game before, and I hope the Trump administration doesn't walk into that trap. Anything less than regime change will be a victory for the mullahs, and it will be seen as a victory by the Russians and the Chinese and the North Koreans. So much is riding on this. The U.S. is in it and now must complete it with regime change.
We did see the markets rally yesterday on reports that President Trump gave Iran 5 days, would postpone strikes on Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for 5 days, he announced, following talks between Washington and Tehran, talks which Iran seems to be denying. What do you think's really happening here at the moment?
Well, the Iranians often make it a point not to talk to you directly, but they do it through intermediaries. I think that's what's taking place here. And the Pakistanis and the Turks and the Egyptians are hoping to get the vice president and some Iranian official to sit down and discuss terms. But I don't think you're going to get a real agreement that ends the crisis. The Iranian government, the mullahs, have a tradition. They will say anything, promise anything, and then go back to their bad old ways. They've done this for 47 years. I don't think they're going to change now. And they're counting on the pressure at gasoline prices in the U.S., disruption to oil. The longer it takes to get these facilities moving again, the higher the price of oil will remain. Meanwhile, Iran is allowed to export through the Strait, continue to export oil to primarily to China. Why we haven't stopped that, I don't know.
On the line with Steve Forbes,
I don't see anything positive happening.
In the meantime, the price of oil hovering around $100 a barrel, and this just in, I'm looking at the latest AAA fuel gauge survey here for the Los Angeles area, and the price of diesel has just hit a record high today here in the Los Angeles area, $7.06. $7.06 a gallon for diesel is the record high here in the Los Angeles area achieved today. The price of regular gas, $5.93 on average. That's still below the record high we saw back in 2022. And the premium now at $6.31 a gallon. Some stations charging a lot more than that in the $8 range already. What do you see ahead here for oil prices? The price of oil still well below its all-time high, which I believe was $148 a barrel back in 2008 during the financial crisis. Obviously, a big, very nervous time here on Wall Street and Main Street when it comes to energy prices.
Yes, I think we're going to, and I wish the president would make a nationwide address in the Oval Office behind a desk calmly, explaining what the stakes are and whether this takes 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months or longer, it has to be done. And in the meantime, there are going to be disruptions. There are going to be surprises. And we must be prepared that this is the price we pay for removing a real cancer on the world. Again, that regime is not going to change. And if it survives, it'll be, in essence, morally stronger in the eyes of many than ever before, that survived full-scale assault by the U.S. and by Israel. And it survived, and that means they're going to be back to their hideous terrorist activities again. So, again, anything less than regime change is going to be seen as a victory. And I guarantee you, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin are looking. Xi Jinping will eventually get a meeting with President Trump. And if he thinks that President Trump in the U.S. is incapable of going through with real measures to see something to its success, that the U.S. will quickly tire of it, then I think Xi Jinping will consider very serious moves on Taiwan, perhaps not an invasion, but perhaps a quarantine of some sort, and which would be catastrophic.
In the meantime, Israel continues to come under attack. I'm looking at the latest headline here. President Trump says talks with Iran progressing as Israel said to fear a premature ceasefire. Looks like Tel Aviv has been hit. Another major Israeli cities have been hit, despite Israel's very strong Iron Dome defense system. Give us your assessment of what's happening there and Israel's moves into Lebanon to wipe out Hezbollah and so forth.
Well, I think when a war always has surprises, and one of the surprises here is the number of ballistic missiles, the number of drones that Iran has, and we had underestimated its ability to produce these things, even though they've been supplying drones to the Russians for quite a while. And when you fire enough projectiles, some of them eventually are going to get through, which is what's happening in the Gulf states and, of course, in Israel itself. But that is no reason for pulling back. And I think it's very important that the head of the effective ruler, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, has said we must have regime change in Iran. He knows, the Gulf states know, that if this regime survives, they're going to be under pressure in the months and years ahead. Iran's not going to change unless you get regime change.
All right, we're also watching, as all of this is happening, interesting developments in the private credit market, investors pulling out of private credit, and some interesting things happening in that world of private credit funds exposure to software, for example, coming back to bite them. According to the Wall Street Journal, private credit has spent a decade rising from niche alternative to a pillar in global finance. Can you explain what's happening with these various headlines and redemptions being restricted and so forth?
Well, first of all, one critical reason why this whole private market grew after the 2008-2009 crisis is the massive regulations and capital requirements we put in the aftermath on the banks, way beyond what was necessary. And so banks were ending up hiring more compliance officers than lending officers. And with banks not making the extent of the loans, volume of loans that they had traditionally done, private sources rose up. And with a lot of these private credit sources, they went to the lower end of the market. So it's sort of could be a version of what we saw back in mid-2000s, 2005, 2006, which we know how badly that ended up with. This is sort of a version of subprime lending that we saw 20 years ago. It's now to a lot of companies that normally would have gone through the banks and now going through these companies. And unlike a bank, a lot of these credit outfits don't have the breadth of a portfolio. In other words, good stuff and some shakier stuff that a bank would have. So it shouldn't pull down the financial system, but it is going to mean losses. And one of the things we see when people start to have uncertainty is people make irrational decisions. You can tell people all they want. Don't let emotions take over, but emotions are emotions. And I think what you're seeing here with all of these withdrawals from these credit sources like Apollo and others is precisely they're panicking.
See it tonight, read about it tomorrow, but hear it now on Mottek on Money, live on the air with the one and only Steve Forbes. Thank you very much for explaining all that in plain English. And another component of all of this, the unsettling of these credit markets, is AI tools from Anthropic and OpenAI to automate functions and so forth. That's also been cited as another reason for this credit market meltdown. So we're keeping an eye on that. And speaking of meltdown, suddenly gold and silver have melted down from recent highs, while so-called digital gold, Bitcoin, has held up pretty well compared to gold and silver. Give us your reaction to what's happening in those markets.
Well, as we all know, Bitcoin took a huge hit recently, going from roughly 126,000, going low in the 60s. Now it's in the 70s. So they already took a hit. What you see happening with gold is a pullback. China's been selling a lot because they need to raise money for their troubled economy. But we have to remember, gold has more than doubled in price since 2023. And so while what you're seeing then is a temporary strengthening of the dollar, but that is not going to, I don't think that's going to last. I wouldn't be surprised to see gold to go down another 10%, but also in the next 18 months, I wouldn't be surprised to see it roar back over 5,000 because we're going to have, so you've alluded to it, some of the credit problems out there. So this will be soon an opportunity for those who want gold as an insurance policy, not so much of an investment, but as an insurance policy for potential troubles ahead. Gold is now becoming soon will becoming a buying opportunity if it gets much below, say, 4,200.
On the air live with Steve Forbes, which of course Forbes magazine has the famous billionaires list, and looks like a lot of those people on that list fleeing California ahead of this proposed billionaires tax here in California. And you have to follow the billionaires moving across the country here now. What's your reaction to what's being discussed here, given the fact that you're at the forefront of tax reform and taxpayer advocacy? What do you see here happening here in California and leading to the fleeing of billionaires out of the state?
Well, if that referendum gets on the ballot and gets passed, it's going to be absolutely devastating. I'm not sure it'll survive court challenges because there's some dubious parts of it. But destroying capital, destroying savings is never a way to go forward. There's an old saying, money goes where it's well treated and stays where money goes where it's welcomed and stays where it's well treated. In California, hostility to it means a bleak future for the California economy. If these billionaires move out of the state, what that means is not just moving with their assets and potential investment in the state. It means they're not going to be paying state income tax. And as you know, the top 1% of income earners pay almost half of California's income tax. California is a very imbalanced tax system. So California is going to have a bleak future. And this attack on wealth is a manifestation of it. It's also a manifestation of people's frustrations of the fact that we have been overtaxed, overregulated. The economy's not moved ahead the way it should, and people want to, many want to lash out, especially when they read stories about some of the billionaires buying, 2,000 feet yachts and that kind of thing. Stokes that kind of anger. But I hope cooler heads prevail and California realizes it's just going to be shooting itself not in the foot but in the head with a thing like that, because no one's going to want to move into the state for very long thinking that they could be next. And it's not just billionaires. As you know, many well-to-do and even just perfectly typical middle-class people have moved out of the state. For the first time in history in recent years, California, the first time in history of California being a part of the United States, has been, we've seen migration out of the state, which has never happened before for over 1.5 centuries. And that's a result of a bad policy. And yet the bad policy continues, and sadly the state's going to pay a bigger price for it.
Do you dare set foot here in California? We miss you here for book signings and other speeches and so forth. Any plans to come back to the Reagan Library or any big events out this way?
Not in the near future, but I look forward to coming out and maybe cadging a ticket to a Dodger game to see these supermen out on the field. And Dodger Stadium's always good fun.
That's why we'll have to arrange it. We'll have to get the red carpet out for you. Steve Forbes, thank you very much. As always, wish we had more time, but thank you very, very much for taking the call here. Steve Forbes, Chairman, Editor-in-Chief, Forbes Magazine, Forbes Media. Thank you very much for joining us live here on Mottek on Money on 790 KBC.
When you really need care, you need 24/7 access to a care team, not a maze of paperwork from a third party. Every day, America's hospitals and health systems show up for you. Navigating healthcare can feel overwhelming, but you can count on real doctors, real nurses, real people, providing quality, around-the-clock care when you need it most. They're in your corner, in communities across America. Your neighbors, your lifelines, right beside you, holding your hand and helping find answers. That's what putting patients first actually means. Learn more at strengthenhealthcare.org. Brought to you by the Coalition to Strengthen America's Healthcare.
The expectation and the norm is to win, and that is what we will be able to do here. I believe in the power of UCLA.
It's a new day for UCLA football with new head coach Bob Chesney taking charge, and we need you to be a part of it. The right man is at the helm in Westwood, and the time is now for you to put your support behind the Bruins. UCLA football is ready to win, and we can't wait to see you this fall. Visit UCLABruins.com/tickets for more info on how to secure your seats for the 2026 season. Go Bruins!
Mottek Money continues here in 790 KABC. Good afternoon. Stocks pulling back with the Dow down 84 points at the closing bell today to 46,124. The S&P 500 down 25 at 65.56. The NASDAQ down 185 at 21,762. The yield in the 10-year note now at 4.36%. Those bond yields continue to move higher, impacting fixed-rate mortgage rates, which are moving higher. A New Mexico jury finding that Facebook and Instagram's parent company Meta was liable for failing to protect young people from online dangers, including sexually explicit content, solicitation, and human trafficking. That news coming out just moments ago as we began this broadcast here. Price of oil, of course, in focus with all that's going on with Iran and the Middle East. And we'll be talking more about that with retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Kempfer, who will be joining me live in the next half hour. We see the price of oil right now in New York hovering just below $89 a barrel. Brent crude in London hovering at around $104 a barrel. The other big news impacting the economy and Main Street, we do see the price of diesel hitting a record high here in California today, $7.06 a gallon. The average price now for diesel in the L.A. Long Beach area, $7.06 a gallon, and that blows past the previous record set back in 2022. The price of regular gas now, $5.93 a gallon on average, and premium now at $6.31 a gallon on average. Pays to pay attention to those price signs out there because a lot of stations are charging a lot more than that average price I just mentioned that the AAA fuel gauge survey has calculated. Taking a look at the cryptos now, we see a Bitcoin hovering just above 70,000, Ethereum, ETH at 2,143, Doge at the moment at 9 cents. Gold's taking another hit right now at 4,468, silver 71.57 an ounce. We'll talk more about gold and silver and the Main Street economy with Elliot Salter coming up, famous pawn shop owner in West Hollywood on Santa Monica Boulevard. Elliot Salter will be joining me live coming up in the next half hour to talk about how all this is impacting the Main Street economy. On 790 KABC. Mottek Money continues here on 790 KABC. Stocks ended the day lower, but it looks like stock futures are moving higher now following a report that the U.S. has given Iran a plan that could bring the Iran war to an end, according to CNBC. We're watching these developments closely. This is coming after President Trump said today the U.S. is in negotiations right now, in his words, with Iran, and he added that Iran is talking sense, in his words, and suggested it is eager to make a peace deal. The New York Times earlier today reported that the U.S. is said to have sent Iran a peace plan to end the war, citing two unnamed U.S. officials. The 15-point plan was delivered by way of Pakistan. According to the Wall Street Journal, the U.S. has sent Iran a 15-point plan to end the war, which centers largely around previous Trump administration demands on Iran. Pakistan offered to mediate peace talks between the U.S. and Iran to end the war, an overture that was amplified by President Trump on social media today. Meanwhile, Iran continues to hit Israel, as well as Kuwait, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia with new missile attacks. The Pentagon planning to deploy about 3,000 soldiers from the Army's elite 82nd Airborne Division to the Middle East to support operations against Iran, according to the Wall Street Journal. Following all of these developments closely, joining us now is retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Kempfer, retired U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer, national security analyst, and host of the Strat podcast. Colonel, thank you very much for taking the call. Give us your reaction now to the latest news and these latest headlines.
Well, Frank, basically it's very optimistic that maybe we're on the road to peace, and we've heard peace used that multiple times in terms of what these negotiations are. But as you heard, the strikes are still continuing. Iran is still striking. Israel is striking other places throughout the Persian Gulf. To my knowledge, U.S. and Israeli airstrikes are happening, although we are not hitting those power plants that were talked about last weekend with that 48-hour warning phase that was then extended for 5 days, which appears to have kind of put a little impetus behind this entire effort at trying to come to some sort of diplomatic or negotiated settlement.
On there live with retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Kempfer, and of course the Strait of Hormuz very much in focus and appears to be closed, which is impacting the global economy and the price of oil and ultimately the price of gas here in Southern California, and the price of diesel has just hit a record high price here in the Los Angeles area, above $7 a gallon. Mm-hmm. What about the situation there with the Strait of Hormuz and the movement of 82nd Airborne troops into the region?
Well, with the Strait of Hormuz, it is closed, not completely closed. The Iranians have let a few ships go through, a few tankers go through, not a lot, but certainly that 20% of the world's oil that was going through there is not happening. I should also mention liquefied natural gas. Qatar is a huge producer of that in the global market. It's not happening. And also something that's affecting everybody is fertilizer. They're a major producer of fertilizer and the chemicals that go into fertilizer. There's lots of talk of having an agricultural or food crisis this year because of what's going on. Now, what we're hearing is that Iran has started putting sea mines into the Gulf. That's going to be, or into the Strait. That's going to be a problem. Those will have to be cleared out. But we're also, remember the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit has basically been steaming in from the Far East. It's about in position. The 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit out of Southern California is underway. I think it'll be out there maybe in a week or so. And then, of course, we heard what is essentially the Air Contingency Brigade of the 82nd Airborne Division is moving out. I don't know where they're going to go. I don't know what their plan of employment is, but certainly puts a lot of pressure on Iran to come up with a diplomatic solution before we go to what could be the next phase, which may be boots on the ground.
Yeah, based on how the pieces are lining up on the chessboard, where do you think the troops are most likely to be used if, in fact, they are going to be putting their boots on the ground?
Well, it's tough to say. There's a lot of different things with the MUs, the Marine Expeditionary Units. They're the best in the world at what we call amphibious raids, so they can hit anywhere along the coastline. But there are some islands, some small islands, Greater Lesser Toomb and Abu Musa, actually in the Strait of Hormuz. Everybody's focused on those. Those would be key terrain, if you will, if you want to control the strait. And then, of course, Kark Island, where 90% of Iran's oil and gas comes out of. That would be one that the Marines could hit. That's also one that might be open to, say, an airborne type of operation if they're to take that. But this is just guesswork. We don't know. We have no idea. It simply gives the president a lot of flexibility in what he could do.
All right. So what about the Navy's role in all of this? Do you see a situation where they would be able to escort vessels through there?
Well, they have some escort capability. They're a little limited in that regard. That's one of the problems. That's one of the reasons the president is reaching out to our allies. We just need more ships. We need more ships for escort. We definitely need more minesweepers. That's one thing we lost a lot of capability of after the Cold War to back up was minesweepers. A lot of these countries, not just the European countries, but Japan, South Korea, they have minesweepers, and that's something that we really want to get in the Strait of Hormuz.
See, the Economist, that magazine has come out with an article. What a battle to reopen the Strait of Hormuz would look like, noting a lot of ships, aircraft, and soldiers who have to spend a long time in harm's way for uncertain results. Have you contemplated what this battle might look like?
Well, that article I thought was rather well written. Yeah, I've thought about it a lot. I actually had a lot of reasons to think about the Strait of Hormuz going back many decades. But yes, it would be a tough battle, but it really depends on what's going on around the country. A part of this is putting enough pressure on basically causing attrition with the Revolutionary Guard Corps and the besieged militia. If they can be disabled, if I could use that term, if they can be disabled to the point that those who want to overthrow this regime are empowered to the streets, things could happen in Tehran and elsewhere around the country that could make that battle for the Strait somewhat irrelevant if they could actually turn the tide of who actually controls and shots on what the military does.
All right. In the meantime, Iran getting off shots to its surrounding neighbors as well as Israel and these bomblets, right, and the new weaponry being used. How are they achieving that? Are we going after these targets once they're identified?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, we have the program we have essentially is watching for whenever they launch anything and then taking out the launchers. It's been pretty effective. They're well less than 10% of their peak capability during the war, taking out drone systems, taking out TELs, transporter erector launcher systems for the ballistic missiles. And in that regard, if you take out the launchers for ballistic missiles, their inventory of ballistic missiles becomes much less relevant because they can't actually use them. So that's part of our strategy there. But, these cluster bomb units that they've been putting on the ballistic warheads, that's a little problematic, certainly in Israel, because they can intercept the ballistic missile, but if it can break apart and drop all these little bombs, as we've seen, it's been causing some serious damage, injuries, and worse throughout Israel. So that has changed a new dynamic. And of course, the fear is that we're going to see that elsewhere employed throughout the Gulf. And by the way, one thing I would point out is Saudi Arabia, behind the scenes has been pushing very hard, like, don't stop this war until you win. Don't stop this war until the regime's out, which is very interesting to hear Saudi Arabia basically taking this hard attack, pushing Netanyahu and President Trump really go for those objectives they stated at the beginning of the war.
Do you see any other countries like Saudi Arabia, for example, launching attacks on Iran?
I don't know if Saudi Arabia will launch attack. It may join in on some of the strike missions. I don't think they want to do it right away, but I wouldn't be surprised if the UAE steps up and maybe does something. Those little islands in the Strait, Greater Lesser Tomb, and then Abu Musa, are actually claimed by the UAE as their sovereign territory. That was territory that the Shah back in 71 just went in and took those islands, and the UAE wasn't in a military position to oppose it. But certainly the UAE would love to recover that. I have no doubt that if we went in and took them, that they would probably make a diplomatic move to say, hey, why don't we come in and occupy those islands and you take the Marines and go somewhere else. So I can see the UAE get involved. I'm not sure if Qatar wants to militarily get involved, but Qatar desperately wants to get the Strait of Hormuz open. So I could see them adding naval assets and other things to help with the Strait. In fact, I see a lot of countries eventually wanting to basically get involved with whatever this combined task force thing is that we set up to open the Strait of Hormuz.
All right, and briefly, Colonel, I see pictures of the Shah's son on Westwood Boulevard here in the West Los Angeles area. What do you think the end game will be here? Will the Shah's son end up back in Tehran?
Well, Reza Pahlavi, he's been rather outspoken. He's been on all the news shows talking about this, and protesters on the streets back in December and January were actually shouting his name, and he's put himself forward, not so much as the Shah as a kind of an interim leader, as a kind of a neutral leader to help the transition from this regime to whatever it becomes, hopefully a democratically elected government. But he may play a role yet, but we'll see how this goes. I can't tell you which way it goes. And of course, we're talking to somebody in Iran. I'm just curious who that is.
Colonel, thank you very much for taking the call. We'll keep an open line to you as we track all of this closely. That is retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Kempfer, retired Marine Corps intelligence officer, national security analyst, host of the Strat podcast. Colonel, thanks again for joining us live here this afternoon.
Thank you, Frank.
On 790 KBC.
The expectation and the norm is to win, and that is what we will be able to do here. I believe in the power of UCLA.
It's a new day for UCLA football with new head coach Bob Chesney taking charge, and we need you to be a part of it. The right man is at the helm in Westwood, and the time is now for you to put your support behind the Bruins. UCLA football is ready to win, and we can't wait to see you this fall. Visit UCLABruins.com/tickets for more info on how to secure your seats for the 2026 season. Go Bruins!
Pack of Money continues here in 790 KABC. Pullback for the stock market today as the price of oil moves higher. Nervous times in the Middle East with the Iran conflict appearing to getting bigger for the moment. Saudi Arabia reportedly agreeing to giving the U.S. military access to King Fahd Air Base, a reversal after previously saying its bases could not be used to attack Iran. A source familiar with the decision said it's only a matter of time before the Saudi Arabia formally enters the war, and the UAE moving to. The Emirates have begun shutting down Iranian-owned assets, including the Iranian hospital and Iranian club in Dubai. We continue to follow the latest headlines here. Gold, meanwhile, has seen its worst five-day price drop since 2011. The precious metals have taken a hit this week, with the price of gold right now hovering at around 4,468 an ounce. Silver at 71.57 an ounce. Taking a look at platinum, it too has come down from recent highs, right now at 1,962, and palladium at 1,454 an ounce. Silver's seen a 10-day losing streak and is down for the year now after shedding more than 14% over the past several weeks. Keeping track of all of this very, very closely and how it impacts the Main Street economy, joining us live now is the one and only Elliot Salter, who owns the Elliot Salter Pawn Shop and Loan Shop on Santa Monica Boulevard in West Hollywood. You've been following the price moves, Elliot, very closely, and thanks very much for coming to the line here this afternoon.
Good afternoon, Frank.
Great to have you with us here. First of all, give us your reaction to gold hitting a record high, around $5,500 an ounce, and now it's at around about $1,000 less than that, to around $44.68 here at this moment for gold. Silver, which got up to around $115, now at around 71 and change. Give us your reaction to these dramatic moves we've seen.
Holy moly, I can't believe my eyes.
Wow.
Call in an hour. Or call tomorrow. I don't care. I don't know. My whole life, gold's been so constant, and now it turned into a commodity like pork bellies. So somebody's making a lot of money, and somebody's losing a lot of money, but I don't know who.
All right. Are people coming in buying or selling gold and silver at this point?
Both. I have no bullion or coins, but I have jewelry, and people are still buying jewelry. I mean, you got to sell it close to what the market is, the spot market. But I need to keep my money moving. I make no money if it doesn't move. So, giving good deals. All you people out there in La La Land, come on in for good deals in gold jewelry.
And you also give loans, too. So how are those handled now with these dramatic price moves in both gold and silver? What kind of loans are available now?
Oh, good loans, but the loans are not as close to the market value or the spot value as they were before. You know, when it's consistent, you have a chance to know you don't need to make a big margin. But now that it's fluctuating or dropping now, it's tougher. But the clients understand it, and they work. I work with them. They work with me.
Wow. So, what is the other big buzz in this business? Obviously, platinum and palladium too have had big outside moves on the upside, and those have also pulled back. Any interest in palladium and platinum?
I don't see any of that in my little neck of the woods. It's just gold and silver. And it's I don't know. It's been months now that gold's been up, and I'm still in shock.
One thing we haven't seen, in the past when we've seen these kind of moves in the price of gold, you see the shops pop up. We buy gold. We haven't seen too many of those pop up lately. What do you think's going on this time?
I know a gentleman who does that with a group of people, and he says they're going out on the road. It's not happening in LA, but everybody in Middle America sees it on the news, and they're, I guess, cashing in on all that free publicity.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. So, How is the economy? You're on the front line of the economy. Speaking to Elliot Salter, by the way, owner of Elliot Salter Pawn Shop and Loans, the famous place there on Santa Monica Boulevard in the heart of West Hollywood. How is the economy?
A lot of people are worried, and that is bad for the economy, because when people are worried, they're tightening up on their purse strings. What if? Fix the car, we're not getting a new one. I don't see anybody duct taping their refrigerator, but hey, who knows? That's a pretty out there comment, but You never know what the future holds.
What are people coming in for nowadays? Are they trying to pay the rent, gas, which is soaring? What stories are you hearing?
Gas and rent, and hoping to keep their job that they've got. It's not an easy time for anybody on the working man, working for a living, trying to make ends meet.
What else is coming into the
easy.
store aside from precious metals coming in and out? What are people unloading nowadays?
Well, they're not unloading. I had just had a guy come in with a one-of-a-kind guitar. Who was that guitar belong to that we just got? Oh, you weren't here. Joe knows. But it's a collector's item, and the guy that has the collection sold a few pieces at auction. And my customer bought it and came in and borrowed $5,000 on it. And I looked at it, I said, it's a beautiful guitar, Joe, but is it worth that kind of money? He goes, oh, yeah, much more. So, as long as there's room in the middle somewhere for me, I'm happy.
Wow. Well, when musicians start pawning or selling their instruments, that could be a sign of a recession, right? You've seen this cycle play out before.
It could be, but on one hand, guitar players generally have a collection of guitars for every gig that they may or may not get. So a guitar player who's generally on an electric guitar owns 12 guitars. Does he need 12 guitars? He says no, because probably 10 of them are here on loan with me. So, it's something when they have money, they buy a guitar.
Well, what about vinyl records? Is that still a thing now?
What?
Vinyl records, are you selling or getting those in?
That's Dave's specialty. Dave will always take old vinyl. He loves it. And the quality of a vinyl on a nice turntable beats all other forms. Well, not live. You have live and then vinyl.
Yeah, old school.
Yeah, old school is the best.
Terrific. Well, Elliot, thanks for taking the call here and giving us the reel on what's going on in the real economy. That's Elliot Salter, the owner of Elliot Salter Loans and Pawn on Santa Monica Boulevard in the heart of West Hollywood. Elliot, all the best to you and your team there. Thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon.
You bet, Frank. Thanks. Always good talking to you.
Likewise.
Take care of yourself.
You too. Thank you very, very much. The Dow down 84 at the bell today. S&P 500 down 25. NASDAQ down 185. Stay tuned now for the News Blitz on 790 KBC.
The expectation and the norm is to win, and that is what we will be able to do here. I believe in the power of UCLA.
It's a new day for UCLA football with new head coach Bob Chesney taking charge, and we need you to be a part of it. The right man is at the helm in Westwood, and the time is now for you to put your support behind the Bruins. UCLA football is ready to win, and we can't wait to see you this fall. Visit UCLABruins.com/tickets for more info on how to secure your seats for the 2026 season. Go Bruins!